Our guest today is one of the most renowned and respected Tolkien scholars. We'll discuss his latest publication, recently released in the United States and Great Britain. We also learn what Tolkien Studies are. Join us for episode number 140. Hello, my name is Maciej and I would like to welcome you to the charming Green Dragon Inn. Normally in our podcast, I prepare and tell you about interesting stories from Professor Tolkien's texts, as we analyze them together with my co-host.
Hi, I'm Kasia, and in addition to discussing parts of the books together, I support Maciek linguistically, especially when we discuss Tolkien's original writing or talk in English as we do today. I also take care of the technical side of our podcast.
Another member of our podcast team is Ola, who is the co-host from time to time and take care of our social media. And the last but not least member is Nikodem, who is responsible for all the audio editing and special effects.
The Green Dragon Inn is a friendly place for all travelers. Here, you will be able to wander together with us through the immensely rich works of Professor John Ronald Drout Tolkien, because we analyze his texts a few paragraphs at a time in each episode. We delve into the history, interesting facts, and some humor. We also compare our native Polish translation of the professor's works with each other and to the original text.
In our conversations, we rely heavily on already existing material, which forms a very sizable Tolkien's collection. That is, the base of books on which we focus when preparing each episode. However, everything is done in a very in-like manner, as a loose and casual conversation between us, and sometimes between our special guests who regularly visit the inn.
If you wanted to learn more about our podcast, we encourage you to check out episode number 0 or the trailer. There we talk a bit about ourselves and, above all, about the very form, inspiration and goals of our podcasting. Take a seat in our inn under the Green Dragon, prepare yourself a pint of good drink, and we begin our today's journey to Middle-earth.
Our guest today holds master degrees in communication in English. He holds a philosophy doctor in English from Loyola University in Chicago. In 2008, he earned professorship of Wheaton University in Massachusetts.
He served as a chair of the English department and then director of the Center for the Studies of the Medieval at Wheaton. He is also the co-founder and one of the main editors of the Tolkien Studies annual, which collects the most important articles on Tolkien's research for a given calendar year.
He has written numerous articles on Tolkien's work. He was also the main editor of the J.R. Tolkien Encyclopedia, Scholarship and Critical Assessment, published in 2007. At the end of 2025, another book by our guest was published, which will be one of the main topics of our conversation today.
Dear listeners, let us welcome a medievalist, a fan of fantasy and science fiction, a lover of digital and cognitive analysis of literature, passionate fisherman, an ice hockey fan, and of course, a huge fan of Middle-earth, Professor Michael Lacey-Drout.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
It's really an honor to be speaking to you and talking to someone so far away and then still interested in this work and in Tolkien's world. There's so much going on always, and it's good that there are people who are interested in the literary and cultural side of things, and not only in actors and films and things like that. So I really appreciate it.
Definitely.
We are interested in books, so that's our passion. And
of course, we follow the movie news, as all of us, I think. But it's part of the package, but not the main focus.
Exactly.
We're also the book fans.
So it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And traditionally, we have 5 questions that we ask all our guests that are first time in our show. And the first one is mine. For how long have you been reading Tolkien's books?
My first experience with Tolkien's works were my father reading me The Hobbit, probably when I was between 5 and 6 years old. And after we finished The Hobbit, he read The Lord of the Rings. And when we got to the end of The Return of the King, we started over with The Hobbit, and we continued that for a couple of years. So pretty much my whole life that I remember. And apparently it goes back even further than that, because when my father brought home, got a free poster with buying the paperback books, and it got hung on the wall in the spare room at my grandmother's house. And I apparently would stand up in my crib and point at it and say, "What that? What that?" And of course, because it's the Barbara Remington covers of the 1970s paperback editions that she painted without having read the books.
Yes.
What that was a really good question, because there were things that she painted that had nothing to do with the books at all. So it's been my entire life. I mean, I'm 57 now, so I think it's fair to say that I've been reading or having read to me Tolkien's books for 50 years.
So if you started with The Hobbit at 5, how old were you when you started Silmarillion? Then I'm curious.
I read the Silmarillion immediately when it came out in the winter of 1978. So I was 9.5 years old when I read the Silmarillion for the first 2 times.
And did you enjoy it?
I loved it. I was fascinated by it. I made lists of the characters from it. I wrote in my copy in pencil, very 9-year-old handwriting, is next to all the characters in the family trees, how they got killed, because they all got killed.
Yes.
And it's been an important part of my whole life.
And how do you think, the follow-up question, your father read to you Hobbit, you have read to your children. Do you think there is an age when people should start read books of Tolkien to children?
Well, yeah. So I read the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit to my daughter when she was only 4, but it was just, I read everything to her because it was the only way she would fall asleep. It was to have reading going on. And in fact, that's when I started reading Old English to her, just to put her to sleep, because otherwise she would ask questions about everything. Then I read it to her again when she was 7. And as a 7-year-old, she really understood it and loved it. So 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, any of those are good times to read the books. There's obviously things that the kids don't understand. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter in a sense, because they get so carried along with the story, and then when they go back and read it themselves, there'll be more that they'll get out of it, I think. But they're wonderful read aloud books, because he read much of those Lord of the Rings out loud to his group of friends, the Inklings, and you can tell, because, for example, you're never unclear who is speaking, which character is speaking. He always gives you, good clues for that. You never have the experience of reading a whole paragraph in one voice and then, oh wait, that wasn't Gimli, that was Legolas or something. Yeah. And it's just the rhythms of it work well with breath pauses, and it was designed for reading aloud. Really.
It's very musical and full of rhythm. Yeah.
In Polish, we have for specifically the Lord of the Rings, but also for the Hobbit, there are 3 translations from 3 different translators for both Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. And they translated the text very well, with the meaning, with using the right words, and also it's sounding well, but it will never be what original is. So sometimes for especially those very rhythmical fragments, we come back to the original and we read it as well out loud at our podcast, because it's just sounds right. It's
different, it's better, and yeah.
Yeah. All right. So thank you for the answer. Let's move to the second one. Do you have a favorite quote or saying from Tolkien's works?
I have many, but
it's hard to pick one.
Yeah, it's hard to pick one. What's on the top of my head right now is when Gandalf is talking about how Sauron doesn't understand. Doesn't understand what they're doing, and he says that we would cast him down and set no one in his place is a thought that does not enter his mind. And I think I've said this a bunch of times before, but I think the line of cast him down and set no one in his place is the most revolutionary line in 20th century English literature. Mm-hmm. It is such, it's revolutionary because, of course, it's not anything that has ever been done. When you cast something down, people always want to put themselves in his place. But it is, it's fantasy, and it's a fantasy, I think, that is immensely moral and powerful. So I think right now that's my line: cast him down and set no one in his place.
Great line. Yes. And the next question is, which place or places in the whole Legendary would you choose for your retirement, and why, of course?
So this was also a difficult one. I think the obvious answer is the Shire, but there's two others that I would be very tempted, and I think the other obvious one is Rivendell, because I want access to Elrond's library. More than anything else, that would be Rivendell. And then the wild card, or the strange one, perhaps, is this only for Lord of the Rings, or can be anywhere in Middle Earth? Anywhere.
So
anywhere. Then it's easy. Then it's Eldamar. Then it's the Lonely Isle, where it says they cast opals and diamonds and pale crystals on the beach, and the light. And the two trees aren't there anymore, but where the light came through the gap in the mountains, and the harbor with the living arch of rock, sea carved. That would be the other place.
I think that's the first time, right? We have it, and because we had so many answers on that, and that's a very interesting question. Actually, we had even the canoeing on Anduin, for a month or something.
Journey from Middle Earth or something like that.
Journey through all Middle Earth, and different places. But so that's the original. But Shire is the default option, let's say, for many.
I'm curious about. I joked around that if I could get permission somehow to set up a bunch of retirement communities that the houses all looked like hobbit holes, I would be wealthy beyond imagination, because everybody wants that. Once they live there, they might not, but it just seems like the perfect community as it's depicted in the books.
Yeah, I'm curious if on Eldamar there are some libraries, because it's First Age. Yeah, maybe.
I would think Bilbo did his research there, and he had to do his research. It's Tolkien says it was the translations from the Elvish by B.B. were a work of extreme learning. So I don't think it was just asking.
You mean Rivendell? I was thinking about Eldamar, if there is anything.
Oh, yeah, Eldamar. There, yeah, I don't know if there would be anything. I haven't thought about that. I was just thinking about the beach.
Yeah. So it's full retirement. Okay.
All right. Then also, we will see, maybe tricky one. How many books written by Tolkien and about Tolkien do you have in your collection?
I have every book that Tolkien wrote, even the weird and fairly rare, hard to get ones, though sometimes those are like photocopies, that I've put into binders. My personal research library is about 4,000 volumes, but certainly not all Tolkien. Most, many of them are medieval. I would estimate that I have about 200 to 300 books that are solely on Tolkien and not on other fantasy and stuff like that.
And I'm curious, do you work more with digital versions, or do you work with paper?
I work with paper as much as I can. I use the digital versions for like using the Lexomic software to analyze or track things. But I try always. I would much rather read things in books than on screens, and so that's what I usually do. Like for Tolkien Studies, we have to have a reference book, and we chose at the time we chose it 20 years ago, it was still like the most definitive edition. That was like the 1984, I think, hardbound edition of the Lord of the Rings. And so we decided that we would keep that as our page number reference, no matter what changes, so that everything in Tolkien Studies will have the same, page number references. And those, we were using my copy, and they started to fall apart. So I had them bound with, what's called a treasure binding, which have like, some gemstones and leather. So it'll be like, I don't know, the almost magical standard reference, and after I'm gone, someone else can keep it and, make sure it stays the same for that way. But yeah, I'd have it all on parchment and written by hand if I really was had my way, but that's a little that's a challenge.
Okay,
definitely.
Right, it's something like author. The collection of Tolkien books we have also around 200, 300. We have
hundreds.
And there's so many more being published every year now that it's almost impossible to keep up. Which is a good thing. It's frustrating if you're trying to do a bibliography or right that way, but it's really good to see that there's so many people who are interested and who are contributing their thoughts to the field.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, next question, the fifth and the last of the first part of our interview. If you could choose one character to go on quest to Mount Doom and destroy, or at least try to destroy, the One Ring, who would it be and why? Of course, you can choose anyone from whole Legendarium.
And I have to think that the logical choice, it has to be Sam, because really Sam led the quest from the time of the Emyn Muil, and he also showed that he was as immune to the pull of the ring as anyone could be, but. It's a tough question because you think, okay, well, I'd give it to someone who's the hardiest in toil, like Turin, or, the bravest and, like fiercest, like Fingolfin, or, Finrod, who maintained his oath forever. But the whole point is that powerful people are more easily corrupted. And so, if you chose the High King of the Noldor, he's obviously brave enough to go fight the devil one-on-one, but, then you'd be risking that he would turn into a Dark Lord himself. So I think the right answer has to be Sam. I agree with that, which is probably the general view, I think.
Yes.
We often discuss during this question the perspective you mentioned with corrupting the powerful characters, but also the success of the mission was with being unnoticed, and with the powerful like elves or whoever would go. Would Sauron really not notice that?
Yeah,
they
that's
are coming?
That's true, right? They're right. I mean, Glorfindel apparently, is a glowing visible figure if you're
even
in the ring world.
Even in the physical sense.
Yeah, it will be hard to be hidden.
I always wonder how Gandalf feels when he sees the Balrog and realizes that he left Glorfindel Balrog Slayer back in Rivendell, and there's never any mention of that. So as Tolkien says in that one footnote, like it's probably not the same Glorfindel. But maybe it is. But either way, I thought that was
would be
ironic.
He could be also more powerful, just like Gandalf was sent back. He was more powerful than before. So maybe Glorfindel was also. Okay.
Glorfindel it's a challenging one. Like, why did he come? Tolkien made notes about that, and of course the answer in terms of the process of composition is that simply Tolkien needed a name for this helpful elf that was going to ride by, and he did not think of that at the time as the Glorfindel from The Fall of Gondolin. At least he seems to not. He seems to say, I just needed a good name. I always think about that. He was willing to give the Goblin King that's mentioned in The Hobbit, or the Goblin leader that Bulwer Took knocks his head off, and goes, his original name for that was Fingolfin. Like, he took one of his great elf princes and gave it to a Goblin King so he could make a joke about golf.
Yes.
Because that's why it was there, is the Fingolf, Finn. And the reason for that, by the way, is that the etymology of the word golf is obscure. I'm convinced that it came up in some conversation with Lewis, and Tolkien's like, no, we don't actually have any idea where that word came from. And therefore he makes up this story of this, Goblin King's head going down a rabbit hole. It's one of those things that's just slides by because The Hobbit's a children's book, but it's another fanciful etymology for a word.
Typical Tolkien and his ideas.
There are no coincidences there. It's time for our self-advertising, because we would like to remind you about our profile on Patronite.
This means that every one of you can financially support our activities from now on. Consider if you are willing and able to join the group of our patrons. We offer you quite a lot in return, starting with a dedicated Discord channel, additional materials, or the opportunity to join us during the recordings as listeners, and various gadgets and gifts.
We invite you to join our Patronite. Your support will help us not only maintain the level of the podcast, but rise it even higher. You'll find links to our Patronite on our website. They will be also visible on YouTube and in other media.
But of course, you don't have to do anything, because the podcast will continue to appear in the same form as before, absolutely for free. After all, we are Tolkien fans, and we create out of pure passion.
We invite you to our Instagram and Facebook, when we regularly upload posts extending current episodes. Meanwhile, on our website you will find links to all the episodes along with footnotes and our library of books that we use to create it.
We also encourage you to support us on all the channels where you follow us. Your likes, ratings, and reviews make us more visible. This means more Tolkien fans joining our reign.
And as a result, we have more interesting discussions, so don't hesitate to ask questions or comment. Okay, then after our traditional introduction, we will move on to the main topic. The Tower and the Ruin, J.R.R. Tolkien's creation. That's Michael's book, published in December last year, so 2025. And it is a story about how Tolkien created his fictional yet simultaneously universal and real time. And tell us how long it took to write you this book. And as we know, you worked for it for quite some time, right? And it took some time to finish.
Yes, I did, though it's a little complicated, because I would tell people that I've been working on a Tolkien book and it's been 80% finished for 8 years. And I had this draft that I kept having to do other things and wasn't finishing it. And then in the fall of 2022, I got asked if I would be willing to write an op-ed, an opinion piece for the New York Times about it was called "Please Don't Make Middle-earth into a Marvel Cinematic Universe." It was before the Rings, right before the Rings of Power came out, and I argued that there's more to Tolkien than a convenient sandbox to set other things in, and that if you miss out on the heart of what makes Tolkien's work so emotionally important to people, you won't really have anything. Because honestly, what is Middle Earth is just northwestern Europe. If you're looking at it as a landmass or as a series of ecological niches and everything. And so I published that, and then I got an email from an editor at W.W. Norton who said, "You must have a Tolkien book in you." And I told him the 80% finished for 8 years thing, and he said, "Well, send me a treatment in 2 weeks." And so I sat down and I tried to come up with this, and I realized I just hated all of it. And that it felt really derivative. It felt poorly organized. And I was just going to sort of send him, sorry, I don't have anything. And then it was a late night and it suddenly clicked that instead of organizing it like every other Tolkien book is organized, which is there's a chapter on The Hobbit, there's a chapter or two chapters, some chapters on The Lord of the Rings, there's one on the Silmarillion. In other words, instead of organizing it by Tolkien volume or publication, I would organize it by, to try to answer the question of how did this work come to be the way it is? And how does it produce the effects on people that it does? And I kind of wrote that all down really fast, and I sent it off to my editor, and he came back and he said, "That was not what I was expecting. I think you should do it." Mm-hmm. So I then had given myself a kind of very tight, deadline of getting a draft to him within, I said I needed 18 months because I was teaching and didn't have, the time. And really, I wrote about 75% of the book in the fall of 2023. I was on sabbatical and I just tried to write every day. And I had this group of people called the Creators Circle through Signum University Press. And the way that works is once a month, if you sign up for being part of this Creator Circle, then we have a private hour-long Zoom meeting. I talk about what I'm doing and people get like early glimpses of it. And then they gave me all this great feedback. And so since that was once a month, I'd be like, I have to have a chapter done, every month so I can send it to them so that I can get and that worked really well. So in one way, the book took, 10 or 12 years to write since I wrote the first draft of the first part of that original book. But in another way, I really did it over about 9 to 13 months because I ended up not being able to like cut and paste anything from that old book because I just didn't like it. So the ideas were there.
Why do you think so? You changed over like 8 years?
I changed. Okay. I changed over one year. So it's going to come up at some point anyway. So I might as well tell your listeners now that in June of 2022, we lost our son to a fentanyl overdose. He was 18 years old, and that changed everything and changed everything permanently and changed, the way I thought about the work and the way I thought about what I was doing. And in part, that's why I think if The Tower in the Ruin is good, the reason it's good is I was just done playing the academic, scholarly, here's some interesting ideas, and it's very important that you not feel anything about them, but just, treat them in the abstract. And I lost all interest in doing that. And I just decided that I would just, that what I had to offer was how I actually experienced and interacted with the material, not trying to put on a face or an image of some kind of disinterested scholarship when I really wasn't disinterested.
Yeah, and I think
that changed everything.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think the feelings are what makes that story unique, and also it can be felt in the writing.
We also discuss about this situation and your book, and that's what make the book great. We think is that it's your personal book. Like you said, that's not just academic scholar, another book about Tolkien. It's your personal feelings, it's your personal connections with Tolkien, and that's great. That's really great. And also, I was hearing your audiobook, and you are a lecturer, you have read your own book, And
yeah,
it's
because when
amazing.
in November, when I asked Matty what he wants for Christmas, it was, of course, I want this book. So I bought it or Santa bought it in the early December. And then he asked me, right, to have audiobook as well, because then it goes faster when you are driving or just doing things and can listen. So yeah, it was right after for the Christmas gift.
Oh, I'm really honored. The audiobook was interesting. So I've done a lot of audio of like courses. Mm-hmm. I've done 13 audio courses for recorded books for the Modern Scholar, but those are sort of improvisational is not exactly right, but I'm not like reading from a script in those. I have lecture notes. And in fact, my producer always had this rule that for a 45-minute lecture, you're allowed 4 pages of notes and no more, because he doesn't want you to read, because readers found that kind of boring for that kind of material. So when it came time, I was surprised. It's a scholarly book, and yet recorded books bought the audio rights. And so they asked me, like, who would you like as a narrator? And I said, I'd like to do it myself. I've done 13 of these. There was this long pause, and the producer on the phone, and he's like, I don't know how to tell you this, but academics are usually very bad at reading their own work. So I can't just agree to that. And I said, well, wait, I've done 13 courses. He's like, yeah, but it's different. He says, if you really want, you're going to have to do an audition. You're going to have to send us an audition tape. They call it, obviously, it's an electronic file, but he said, pick 5 to 10 minutes of material from the book and read it and send it to me, and then we'll decide. And you can't have your feelings hurt if I say no, because, that's just, I'm trying to make the best product possible. Now, I may have biased things by choosing a set of pages that had both Old English and Quenya, Elvish, in them, so that they would know that if they needed to have this, they'd have to hire someone to read the Old English and someone to read the Quenya as well. So I may have done that, but I sent them the tape, and it was a real experience. It was so different than recording lectures. I mean, the book took 40 hours of studio time, because you have to go very slowly and meticulously. There's a producer sitting there reading the book alongside as you're reading it out loud, and has the sharpest ear. Like if I left the S off the end of a word, or if I was slightly, inarticulate in the middle of something, we'd stop, we'd go back, you listen, you get 3 seconds to hear where you were, and then you have to try to insert your voice into the regular intonation. So it was a real learning experience. It was exhausting because they only let you record 4 hours a day, because they say after that, your voice, it's like people can hear the tiredness in your voice, and they don't like that. So it took a bunch of time in August. But it was a really good experience. And as you can imagine, it was really hard for me to get through some of the stuff at the end, but it was also I was really glad the way that the producer got me through it, because it made it easier to talk about it in, ever there. So it was a good learning experience.
Yeah. I think the last chapter, it was easy to recognize that it was hard for you to read about your son and all the things. But I think it is still great that you have courage to share with us your story.
I didn't think there was any honest way of not doing it. It's the truth. And that is I think a Tolkienian thing about, both for characters and he himself of not adjusting his vision based on what he thought his audience wanted to get, but doing it, the way that he thought was right. And so it was, I felt like I was consistent with the material. I mean, I think that's one thing that if you look at the characters throughout the whole legendarium, there's never a case that I can think of where lying or even being like dishonest or manipulative is okay. That's a fundamental moral rule. People who lie in Middle Earth are not, they're not doing, like, even the good guys don't do it as like a feint to Sauron. They don't, like, Aragorn doesn't like say, I've got the ring to trick, Sauron just makes the incorrect assumption that Aragorn has the ring when he sees Aragorn in the Palantir. And I think that's very, very intentional on Tolkien's part. And it's also what separates Tolkien from other very talented writers of fantasy like George R.R. Martin, or, even at the lower level, someone like Terry Brooks or Stephen R. Donaldson, that there's a real, very understandable core morality that the good guys don't bend certain things ever.
Yeah. It's visible, and also just last note on the audiobook, because that's also something I think it's worth highlighting, is that we like putting so much effort into recording the material and making it real and yours, especially in the time that we live now, in the time of AI, when we could just have this read by a program, is creating a real value for the readers and for the listeners, and we also really felt it when we were listening to the audiobook.
Thank you.
So now maybe we will move a bit more into specifics, what you actually had in your book. So in the first chapter, in the Origins, you touch on the topic of textual ruins, which has become a staple among Tolkien fans. And for us, it was, eye-opening to discover that just as for readers, these are intended indeed textual ruins about which we know little or nothing. And for the characters, commentaries, they are obvious terms of concept. In a sense, we have lost knowledge that was once common, and we see that through in the Tolkien's writing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, in fact, it's the things that were common knowledge that are more likely to get lost and not be discussed later, rather than the rare. There's a term in philology. Difficilior lectio, which means that basically that we remember the difficult word or the unusual word, and we don't necessarily remember or think to talk about the common words. And some little things, like we have no idea what the Vikings sat on when they were on their ships or rowing. We have some inferences. Did they each have like a sea chest that, had all their possessions on the ship in it that they sat on? That's, some cultures have that. How did they line up to get on a ship? Where did they keep their chainmail while they were sailing across the ocean, and how did they put it on and when before going into battle? And these are just little things that an author wouldn't bother to describe because everybody knows that. It's like if you're writing I use the example of like a Tom Clancy book, like a political thriller or an espionage novel, right? And we wait 1,000 years and someone finds that from our culture. They might come to a really bizarre conclusion that Americans were Platonists and worshipped a geometric object because people are always getting orders from the Pentagon. The Pentagon said we have to do. The Pentagon told us to go here, and I can see someone making like a whole wrong, almost like religion out of that, because I am certain that Tom Clancy never says the Pentagon is a pentagonal building in Washington, D.C. that was originally intended as a hospital at World War I and then was repurposed, because everybody knows that, or knows enough. And there's things like that are scattered throughout the remnants of medieval culture. So I mentioned one in Beowulf that there's a character named Ermenloff, and when Grendel's mother has shocked everyone by showing up and grabbing one of Hrothgar's men and dragging him off, and he's lamenting. The king is lamenting, and he says, Ashera is dead, Ermenlof's older brother. No explanation ever. Like, there's nothing in Beowulf, there's nothing in all of Northern literature, but obviously that writer expected that everyone would, we can't even figure it out. Like, would it be like, oh, the poor Ermenlof, he's so, unlucky? Or it's like, well, that's exactly what you'd expect because Ermenlof was always getting it. We don't know. And there's things like, it's not just the oldest stuff in Beowulf. I mean, in Chaucer, there's a reference to Wade's boat. And not just in Chaucer in the 1480s, but in the 1590s edition of Chaucer, a scholar named Spate says, as for Wade's boat, because it is fantastical and so widely known, I leave it be. Mm. We want to know that now, and so like what I realize is that it's those things, it's those gaps that make something feel old when we read it. It's kind of like simultaneously that there really was a complex, sophisticated culture there where people just make little references, just say Ermenlof and everybody knows.
Everybody knows, yeah.
And that it's right in our face because we don't know. And I think that one of Tolkien's little bits of genius, and I don't know how intentional it was in the beginning, right? Because, he intended that people would read the Silmarillion before the Lord of the Rings, even though the Silmarillion wasn't finished.
This is what I wanted to ask, because in the text, in the historical text, if somebody assumed that something is obvious and didn't describe it, we can say that it was just the cultural thing. But is it the intentional method you can now use when writing, like literature, that did it become the official way to make your text sound old?
I think it sort of, in the development in the history of fantasy and science fiction, it's very slowly now I've given it a name, and even before, it's not like I discovered it. Other people, have noticed this idea also, that like, so H.P. Lovecraft would say, I got this from the dreaded Necronomicon, which doesn't exist, right? He just made it up, and then, mention it many different ways. Jules Verne with Journey to the Center of the Earth, and there's the famous scholar Arne Saknussemm, and if we have his manuscript, and it tells, of course, just totally made up, or H. Rider Haggard with she and that shard that he comes up with. So there's these pseudo references. Now, again, I think Tolkien originally intended them all to be real references to the Silmarillion. Like, in other words, when he has Elrond say, Frodo, if you accomplish this, you'll be as great as among the elf friends as Hador and Húrin and Túrin and Beren himself. And, he wants that Tolkien wanted us to be like, wow, those were all great heroes. But I think, he didn't revise those things out once he knew that the Silmarillion wasn't going to be published. And I think, in fact, he didn't, I looked very carefully, like in the early versions of Lord of the Rings, to see if he was, crossing out and deleting, references to Silmarillion material, and he didn't. So he obviously decided, I'll keep those things. And we know for sure that he just made up the Cats of Queen Beruthiel and the 5 wizards instead of 3. Just, he in letters, he said they're the only 2 things in the Lord of the Rings that aren't, that they don't have a backstory, that they were just, and obviously you can understand it. The Cats of Queen Beruthiel, well, cats see in the dark. I get it. So they're just famous cats. But that he recognized that this created that same kind of texture, and this is one of my biggest, I think, I think important points in the early part of the book is that before Tolkien, everybody who wanted to like bring the medieval into the contemporary, right? So people who had, they read Icelandic sagas, or they read King Arthur stories, or Gawain and the Green Knight, or Beowulf, and they wanted to share that with people who didn't read those old languages. Every single one of them thought that you had to imitate the style. Mm-hmm. That's, H. Rider Haggard. Going back further, that's Walter Scott. That's everybody, William Morris. Like, you have to, do medieval style diction or medieval forms. And Tolkien, whether it's by luck or experimentation or genius, he figured out that you could write really contemporary prose. I mean, people like to say Tolkien is old fashioned. I mean, he's old fashioned, like in the sense of, maybe a little bit of his style is more 1890s, 1900s than it is 1940s or something. Mm-hmm. He's not writing like a 14th century writer or, so like that was his genius in was realizing that you don't have to copy the form and the style of the text, and yet you can still make it feel old and real and powerful, because it turns out that it's not the old-fashioned diction that matters. It's the heterotextuality of the sources. It's the idea that there are these gaps and these seeming inconsistencies, and that there are people place things like, more cannot be said of this matter, or some people say this, but others say this other thing. In other words, you've moved the author from like a godlike creator who can do anything and can violate the laws of physics and causality, and you've made him into an editor of a bunch of text, even though they're text that you created as an author.
Yeah, that's exactly what we wanted to ask regarding the Silmarillion, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in the second chapter, the frames, you discuss reasons why, or potential reasons, of course, why Tolkien's Silmarillion wasn't completed during his lifetime. And unlike for The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien couldn't find the coherent framework for this book. And Maciej said that what we could call the Silmarillion could be a whole stack of notes. So this is what you just said. So being editor of the notes, right? Mm-hmm. And here the notes and translation made by maybe by Bilbo during his stay in Rivendell. So
it's actually one of the things that most troubles me is that it seems I remember talking about this to a Hungarian scholar, Gergely Nagy, who came and stayed and studied with me for a semester at Wheaton way back in the early 2000s, that why didn't he just publish the Silmarillion as translations from the Elvish by B.B.?
Yeah.
Use the kind of framework that he did for the Adventures of Tom Bombadil poems, where he says, this in one manuscript, it says Frodo's dream at the top of this poem, but it seems strange that it would be. He could do that, and he would do it beautifully. Christopher Tolkien actually talks about this in the introduction to the Book of Lost Tales. And Christopher basically says, my father thought about it and he chose not to, and I don't know why. Mm-hmm. Like, in other words, that it wasn't that he never saw that, but he must have thought about it and rejected it for some reason. And we'll never really know. I think if I had to, like, we'll never, it's not a resolvable question, but I think what Tolkien himself believed was that the readers who were clamoring for more wanted, and they wanted another novelistic pace treatment. And he looked at the tales in the Silmarillion and he realized that any one of them would be like 4 times as long as the Lord of the Rings if you did it at that at that pace, right? And Shippey's whole thing is that there weren't the hobbits to like mediate it, right? Like, would you really want a story from Turin's point of view? I think you would need someone else's point of view to otherwise it would just be, so difficult to see all the bad decisions. And I think that he just looked at those stories and thought about what it would take to make them novelistic, like the Lord of the Rings story, and just despaired. Because how could he possibly know? He'd been told by so many people that the Silmarillion, as it wasn't publishable, wasn't, and then I think what happened is, and then as he gets more towards the end of his life, I think he did decide, okay, you know what, I'm going to put these things together. I'm going to create the set of legends. and just by that time, he didn't have, the energy, and he had in some ways like lost his confidence about the original. But that's where he suddenly goes, oh wait, I have to tear up the flat Earth cosmology and make it a round world cosmology, which makes it's a myth. I don't understand why that bothered him so much. And obviously the easiest thing is to say, well, Numenor makes it round. But it's, that's, I think, where he got stuck. He just like, how do I tell, you'd have to keep finding, and the trick would be to find like somehow peripheral characters, the equivalent of hobbits, alongside those other stories, which is really sort of what like Lord of the Rings Online, the video game, does. Occasionally the Rings of Power did it, right? Which is find something that's a tangent to the main story that lets you see the main story going on. But
yeah, from the distance,
I always wonder, because everything that he did was always so much more complex and more interesting than the derivative. Like, for example, what we saw people trying to write up or guess about the Silmarillion before it was published was nowhere near what the Silmarillion actually was.
So the follow-up question is, do you think J.R. Tolkien would agree to publish Silmarillion such as we know in this kind of book like Christopher published in 1977?
I think so. I think Christopher could have talked him into the translations from the Elvish by BB as the framework. And I think that I don't know. I think he would actually be. Christopher sent me a letter at one time after I published Beowulf and the Critics, and then it was right around the time that the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out. And he said the biggest thing is his father would just be completely astonished that so many people would want to know more about this world. Like that it's just, he was astonished, but even, the global extent of everything. And I don't know if he would have been like upset about all the material published in the history of Middle Earth. In other words, that he would want to publish finished, completed things and not the pieces.
Drafts.
But I can't think of anyone who could have done it any better than Christopher did, and any more respectfully and non-exploitively than Christopher. There's really I can't think of any places where I would say like, oh, Christopher did that wrong. I think he actually did a really amazing job of not putting himself into his father's work, which I'm sure required a great deal of self-discipline.
For sure, yeah.
Yes, and also the shape we have Silmarillion, and what you said, that it has some storyline. It makes it interesting for people and makes it more readable for more people, actually. So if it would only the stack of notes like together, I don't know if this would be so popular, because Silmarillion is
so successful.
I think that's. The Rings of Power have very mixed opinions, but I think they made Silmarillion one of the highest selling books when the season 1 came out on Amazon.
Probably just so that they could understand what this.
Yes,
what
exactly.
they were trying to do in Rings of Power.
Knowing the whole complexity of Silmarillion, it shouldn't be the best-selling book.
I will say that my student, I've been teaching the Silmarillion, has been requiring it as part of my Tolkien class for almost 29 years now, and the students, they appreciate it. Like they do come to appreciate, how it illuminates things. In fact, my recent challenges have been that there's always like a group of very intense students, almost always young men, for whatever reason, who sort of over systematize everything in the Lord of the Rings based on the Silmarillion. Like, kind of, in other words, that everything that happens in the Lord of the Rings is the Valar kind of pulling on puppet strings, so when Sam finds the little stream in Mordor, that's Ulmo. And when the cloud blows away and he sees the star, that's Manwë doing that. And Varda putting out, it's Arendelle the star, so I don't know what Varda would have to do with it anyway. And sort of all of these things, like when Gollum trips on the, trips and falls, that's Aule who's reaching out and, doing it makes them like the Greek gods in the Trojan War, where they're actually standing next to people on the battlefield and manipulating them. And it's kind of frustrating because every time I'm trying to get them to think of it in literary terms, why did Tolkien create this image or do this thing? And then I'll have a student hand, well, isn't that just that Ulmo is god of water? And so they desperately, I think they desperately want complete coherence and mechanism. And that's why I think that Tom Bombadil drives so many people crazy, because he does not fit into that superstructure at all, which is what makes him great, actually, not bad. But
that's what I think as well. He's a great person, hero in Lord of the Rings. Although people don't like
to me that, right? It's good that there are monsters and bad guys that aren't in league with Sauron and they're like the willow tree is just an evil tree. It just doesn't like people or hobbits, I actually think it was a mistake in the appendices where Tolkien says, and the Witch King stirred up the evil. No, let them whites just be evil all the time, just because they are. They're just there. And, the Watcher in the Water is one of these nameless, the Gandalf says there are nameless things at the foundations of the earth that are older than Sauron. And of course, that would be ruled right out by the Ainu Lindale, because there were nothing older than the Ainur who became the Valar and the Maiar and so forth. So, but it's better when there's, I think that was the other thing that Tolkien got tangled into. And to explain this, I have to be obnoxious and use my own. So my students named this, I did not, but they call it the Drout conjecture. And the Drout conjecture is that it is impossible to make a completely self-consistent system that violates any of the basic actions of causality or Newtonian physics. That anytime you think you have, it will require more and more and more complexity until it reaches contradiction. And again, it's a conjecture, because if you find one example, then it would be wrong. But no one has found an example yet. And I think Tolkien was trying to get Middle Earth to be a coherent, philosophical system that had reincarnation, action at a distance, and a few other things. And he was trying to do this so hard philosophically, and he couldn't get it to work. Because I think in the end, because it can't work, I think it's a hopeless quest. But that doesn't stop people from wanting to try. Ursula Le Guin tried with hers, and the trick is to not go into any details, so that all the conflicts just are off stream. But it's when you start to try to explain, well, actually the magic works like this, that each of those decisions spawns new contradictions and complexities. Like, for example, if it's magic words, who is listening to the magic words? And then it gets out of, and I think that's what he spent, in the 60s when he was writing those philosophical essays that are in Morgoth's Ring. He's really trying hard, but for example, Elvish reincarnation, he can't really get it to work, because either you have the really weird and unpleasant and probably psychologically destructive thing that your 3-year-old toddler is also a 1,000-year-old elf with memories. Yeah. Or you have some other weirdness, or you have it's growing its body without the mother, none of it works. None of it works.
It wouldn't work for sure. Okay, let's get back to your book. Chapter 6, Treats. You focus on the very difficult and perhaps overlooked problem of the superiority of some races over others in Middle-earth. Such division often results in serious conflicts and internal unrest, and that's leading to greater or lesser catastrophe. And in time of increasing division between people in our world, especially in America, which has very tough history about racism, weren't you afraid that your words might be misinterpreted?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't want to write about, I did not go into that chapter with any intention of writing about what I called elvish racism. But it forced itself on me. And I've got a bunch of criticism because I focus on the Silmarillion there, and I don't focus on the things that everybody brings up all the time. Partly because I'll just flat out say, I don't have an answer to the orc problem. I'm not sure there is an answer to the orc problem. Mm-hmm. When I mean the orc problem is that it's okay to kill orcs in huge numbers without feeling the slightest bit of, compassion, and without thinking maybe this orc would turn into a good guy if you talked to him or made friends with him. And I just think that that's an absolutely essential mechanism of the plot. And therefore, trying to find, there is probably one solution, which I call the Buffy the Vampire Slayer solution, which is if the orcs were really effectively like zombie elves, right? So that there's an evil spirit takes the elvish body. Then by killing the orc, you'd be doing everyone a favor because the elvish, would be set free, or the evil spirit would go away. But that's not what Tolkien has, right? Because there's just too many of them. You can't. It doesn't work.
Multiply
and none of it. And my answer is that none of it works. That it's a plot mechanism, and trying to come up with a philosophical explanation won't happen. But obviously, what you get in contemporary discourse around race in America is somehow, which I really don't. Trying to see the orcs as a race of humans is, to me, I think, really problematic when you actually have Southrons and the Easterlings in the story, and Sam does feel sorry, feels human compassion for the dead Southron soldier. And the first thing Sam thinks of is, I wonder what lies were used to get him to come do this. So it doesn't think of him as malicious at all. And I think it's really hard then to say, well, actually, though, Tolkien means the orcs to represent people from Africa, or I don't buy it. And I don't think that's true. But when I was looking at the Silmarillion, I realized that. So what I was trying to do was looking at the secondary themes, right? Because the primary theme of the Silmarillion has to be the workings of evil in the world, right? Morgoth is actually the devil lives at the North Pole or whatever. The evil Santa devil lives at the North Pole. He's real. He's there. You can go see him. So, it's how does evil play out? But I kept coming against that. The precipitating event again and again and again in all the Silmarillion disasters is the division among the kindreds of the elves, right? The Vanyar, the Noldor, the Teleri, and also the elves of light and the elves of darkness. And it became so consistent. It's always people are jealous of each other from the higher one or the lower one. And it starts in the House of Finwë, right? Because Fëanor is the oldest. He's the natural heir. But then his father remarries, and the woman he marries is from a higher kindred. So her sons have golden hair, and they're somehow, they have special talents, and Fëanor's jealous of them, and they resent his treatment of them. And it's everywhere. It's in the dwarves with Thingol, and how Thingol ends up being killed, because what does Thingol say to the dwarves? He's like, how dare you stunted, ugly people, consider me elvish racism is totally real. I hate calling it that, but there's no other good word, because it's not just about families, right? It's not just the House of Finwë. It's the actual fact that they're the Noldor versus the Teleri versus the Vanyar. And it actually is very much like human races in that elves can, have children. There's no problem with that. It's not a true biological difference. It's just a bunch of secondary characteristics. The Vanyar have golden hair, and the Noldor are, taller than the Teleri or whatever it is. And And so, what I realized, the two things. One is, and I think this is actually the most important point, Morgoth did not cause that elvish racism. Morgoth exploits it, but there's nothing in there that ever says the elves didn't think of some being superior to others until Morgoth came along. Mm-hmm. In other words, that sin, and it's a sin in Tolkien's mind, I think, that sin is a fundamental characteristic of fallen humans, right? So that's the first thing. The second is that Tolkien knew it was wrong, right? So I don't buy the whole, like, he's just a man of his time. The fact that orcs have darker skin or they're swarthy. No, he knew it was wrong. And I think that's really important, right? He doesn't want, that's why he has orcs.
Yeah.
I mean, he has orcs because he doesn't want to, say the other human races are evil or inferior or whatever. And that's what orcs, they're monsters, except his, if you want to call it a mistake, is having them talk. Mm-hmm. Because once they talk, they're characters and we impute to them everything we know about humans. It's the same thing as when the talking fox talks, right? Yeah. As soon as the fox talks, it's a character. And so in that way, his own sort of good-heartedness makes even Shagrat and Gorbag and Ugluk and Grishnak, you kind of root for one versus the other for a minute. You differentiate that. You feel bad for the little tracker orc versus the big mean soldier orc there. That should be, a point in Tolkien's favor of being a decent human being, and recognizing that. But also the story mechanism has to work in a certain way. So this is a long way of saying, I know people don't like that. They're from on the one side, people why do you have to even bring, your typical left-wing academic bringing in racism everywhere where it isn't. And on the other side of it, it's how could you not, talk about how racist, I love the phrase, all the good guys are all white and wear white hats, and the black guys are all bad, right? Totally wrong. The Gondor people wear black. Yeah. All the time. The livery of the tower is black and silver. Mm-hmm. And actually the whole thing that elves are all blonde is a Peter Jackson thing, not a J.R.R. Tolkien thing. The only blonde elves are Glorfindel and Galadriel. Yeah. In the Lord of the Rings itself, and Éomer's ready to fight to defend Arwen as being more beautiful than Galadriel. So, that's what it was. It was an unwanted discovery, because I would personally rather never talk about a lot of these things ever again, just because everybody already is talking about this stuff. Mm-hmm. But I just couldn't not see it once I saw it. And when you realize that almost every one of the real tragedies comes out of so in the Silmarillion, Eöl and Maeglin, King Turgon is kinsman. I count you a kinsman. You're married to my sister. And Eöl's I hate you, Noldors. You look down on me. And then, of course, Turgon goes and proves it by saying, you only by our swords are your woods protected. You'll do what I say, or I'll throw you off a cliff. And so, proving it. And I think where I would come down to is that he knew it was wrong. He resisted doing it rather than, indulging in it. And we can learn a thing or two by realizing that it's, in Tolkien's view, and it's not the devil's fault, but it's just being human. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's a tendency that we must consciously resist rather than, ignore. And I think that's right. And I think that's how people can get along, is to recognize in ourselves our uncomfortableness, our fear of others, and confront that in ourselves and try not to do it. That's all you can do, is try. You can't be sure you'll succeed, but I think most people of goodwill, that's what people want to do. So
yeah, that's actually a good segue to the last thing that we wanted to ask you, the chapter 7, tapestry. And there was another eye-opening moment for reading of certain aspects of Tolkien's work. And there you discuss, again, morality and forcing characters in Tolkien's books to act against their will. And you cite examples of Boromir, Denethor, Galadriel, and Frodo. And this was a bit surprising because it's one of the most favorite characters for many, for us, for other fans. And he clearly broke this principle by forcing Gollum to adopt Frodo's will. And as a result, not only Gollum felt the change, but also it changed Frodo. That could never be undone, actually. This was really interesting for us.
So I talked about that idea in conference talks and lectures, and people always hated it. And I knew, because just to give you where I come from on Frodo, right? When I was 7 years old, I was the ring bearer in my aunt and uncle's wedding. And I honestly remember thinking that I had to be willing to have my finger bitten off, but I would do it anyway. I didn't have it like I had to go on a quest or something, but I had somehow in the back of my 7-year-old brain, like, you have to be willing. And so I thought about it really hard. I'm like, I'll do it. And I took it really, really seriously because I love Frodo. I identified with Frodo for years and years. So I think that everybody, who do you identify? What's your favorite character in Lord of the Rings? And like, for a long part of my life, it was Frodo. Mm-hmm. Then for a really brief time, like when I was in college, it was Aragorn. Then I kind of, and then since then it's been Gandalf. As a teacher, I think that like you want to be like Gandalf if you can be, if you're like getting the other ones to achieve their greatness and their potential. Then it's not about you anymore. It's about like to be able to say to Merry and Pippin and Frodo and Sam, among the great you are. That's the greatest feeling a teacher can have. So, but so I did not want to think this about Frodo, but I had for a long time, I'd harbored this suspicion and had this idea that Frodo had actually used the ring to dominate Gollum in the Emyn Muil. And I'd been making that case. And then in writing the book, I was rereading The Treason of Isengard in the History of Middle-earth. And there's a note in there where Tolkien says Frodo uses the ring to dominate Gollum, but from that means he can't be cured. That his recovery is impeded. Now again, that Tolkien wrote that note in 1939. He didn't write the scene until the 1950 or so. So he might have changed his mind. But I tried to lay out in the book all the evidence that Frodo uses the power of the ring without putting it on. And then I was talking about, and then what clicked for me is that was the right choice. In fact, that was the only moral choice that Frodo had. Because if you think about it, when they capture Gollum in the Emyn Muil, they can kill Gollum in cold blood, right? They absolutely could. And if this was George R.R. Martin, they absolutely would. There's no question, right? We got to save the Middle Earth. I'm sorry, Gollum, you're gone. Right. The other thing is they could let him go, in which case he's going to kill them in their sleep or lead enemy. They don't know he's not going to lead enemies to them at that point. And they've sacrificed all of Middle Earth so that they can have, non-bloody hands. Instead, Frodo, and in fact, Tolkien deliberately takes away the possibility of the rope, right? The elven rope. You can't do that. He'll scream and be tortured. And he takes away every possibility so that Frodo has to use the ring. And then he punishes Frodo for using the ring. In other words, and what I mean by that is that Frodo suffers immensely. That's the moment that Frodo starts feeling the pressure of the eye, that the ring becomes heavy. He only mentioned the eye on Amon Hen, not, in the other times walking around. And he feels it. Everything goes bad for Frodo from that moment on. And I think what I took it as the point was that Frodo made the right choice of those three choices. And yet he still suffers for it, because in the end, it's wrong to impose your will upon other people, not necessarily because God is watching and is going to punish you. Your own soul punishes you when you do that. And then I started trying to look at how this plays out all, through the Lord of the Rings and elsewhere. And I thought, if there is a moral message, it is, do not force other people to do things. Now, and it also explained to me why that the people I know who are the most like right-wingish and the most left-wingish both believe that Tolkien is entirely on their side about everything. It's actually kind of funny. Like, you two believe the opposite things about everything, and you're both huge Tolkien fans. And the reason, I think, is that I cannot envision any kind of complex social organization that doesn't rely on forcing people to do stuff. It's what, we can't even force people to stop killing each other, much less anything less, right? So that's the fantasy part of it, except Tolkien is not giving us a utopia. He's just saying what's moral. That doesn't mean what's moral is always achievable. And in fact, that's the whole point, is it's not achievable. Frodo being an example of I think I said in the book, Frodo and Galadriel are, and you could add Sam in there too, are the most admirable characters in the Legendarium. And both of them impose their will upon someone, and bad things happen. Yeah. For Galadriel, it's that she gives Boromir a vision of temptation, and then Boromir breaks. And without even going all the detail, I'll just mention that Faramir, who is, I think, the closest to a stand-in for Tolkien, Faramir says, "What said she to you, Boromir, that lady who dies not?" That's a really weird thing to say if Tolkien didn't have in mind that she showed him a vision of him taking the ring. At the time, he was able to resist it. But having been, 20 feet away from the ring for the next few weeks, it got to him. And again, I don't think Galadriel had a choice. I think she would be irresponsible not to try to find out if all the company is true. And so, like, what I came up with eventually then is that he feels, again, just like, it's just intrinsic to being human, right? It's of being fallen, of not, of having sin, that we can't get along without imposing our will upon others, but that it disfigures our own souls to do it. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought, it's kind of true. I mean, you can't raise a toddler without enforcing your will upon them. Yes. They will fall off the stairs or drown or, go like hug a strange dog or all these things. But your parents, you also feel bad when you do it. When you have to do that moment. Well, I think that's actually our like natural understanding, that it would be Eden if we didn't have to do that. And again, I don't think Tolkien is, and I think this is why so many people, he's not proposing a utopia. He's simply giving you a transcendent goal. And because it's transcendent, we can also talk ourselves into the thing that, well, I'm the one who's going in the right direction there. I'm not imposing on this person, and which is a weakness there. But I think the strength of it is that it's actually something that every single. No, I can't say that's not true. I'm sure there are some political philosophies that just absolutely love imposing. Imperialism loves imposing will on others. But I think the kind of political philosophies that people the people who buy Lord of the Rings books are, middle working class people in basically middle class market, for whatever messes our societies are, we can understand that, intuitively understand that ideal. And Hey, I managed to say something bad about imperialism, so I have that going for me, especially considering the events in the world today.
Yes. Dangerous topic.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for giving us insights into your book. For all our listeners, really encourage you to take a look on to either read or listen to the great audiobook from Michael. And here we have a question. Are you aware of any plans to translate and publish your works into Polish, actually?
Not yet. I'm still hopeful. The only foreign translation that has been actually contracted is into Ukrainian of all things. But the publishers did tell me that usually you'll wait until the book has been out for a while and they can have a year's worth of sales figures before that they'll get interest in translating it. I would love for it to be translated into Polish and Hungarian and German, because it's the part of Europe that my ancestors came from, and I think it would be an amazing it would just be a great thing.
Yeah, that would be lovely for the Polish fans. We are waiting for the next part of the history of Middle-earth being translated into Polish, because there is a big undertaking by one of the publishers in Poland to translate the whole history of Middle-earth into Polish, which is great. And we do have how many parts? Seven already. So
it's more than halfway through.
More than half,
yes. And it's very challenging also with having free translations into Polish that the whole work is based on, but it's still great to keep in our hands the Middle-earth in Polish. And have you ever been to Poland?
I have not. My wife has managed to go twice, but both times I had to stay and take care of the kids. She has done joint work with a Polish company called Pit Radwar that is in your defense industry. Mm-hmm. So she's been to Warsaw and to Gdańsk.
Thanks.
And and Gdańsk is where we're not totally sure, but it does seem like that some of my ancestors came from there. They were German, because almost everyone there was for a while. But it was in Poland. That counts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. My ancestors are either German or Austria-Hungary or Gdańsk, as far as we can tell.
Oh, great connections with us.
If you ever visit, you can give us a sign.
Yeah, absolutely, and I do. I want to see that part of Europe very, very much. It's I don't know, that my one grandmother, where we can trace an absolute place, is a little village called Strem, which is right on the Austria-Hungary border. And in fact, it was so much on the border that in the census records, all the names on the one side of the street are in German, and all the names on the other side of the street are Hungarian. And I think some comedian has a line like, in Eastern Europe, borders come to you.
Yeah, we are originally from the Polish small city on the border with Czech Republic, actually. So it's not that close to have the same street names, but it's pretty close by. We could go and...
Yeah, and my great grandmother's name was Ungar, which is of course German, but means Hungarian.
Yes. More complicated.
There was some confusion back then, I'm sure. There was some reason she left, and went by herself on a ship into a place where she didn't speak any of the language. There must have been a good reason to do that. So
yeah. Europe had hard times in the 19th century, 20th century. So there are reasons to leave. There were reasons to leave. Okay. And as a fan of ice hockey, because I am NBA fan, basketball fan, so I know more about basketball. But you lived in Boston or Massachusetts, and you lived also in New York and New Jersey partially. And who do you like more? Boston Bruins.
So for years and years, I was a New Jersey Devils fan.
Okay.
Which was, especially at the beginning when they were the worst team in the league for 8 years in a row or something, was a little difficult. But then they had this great run in the 90s. And I never thought I would become what I thought of as one of them, one of those Bruins fans. But your kids grow up here and they root for the team that all their friends are rooting for. And like my wife and I watch, like we either have a Bruins game or a Celtics on in the background, like every night. So I am afraid to say I am a Bruins and a Celtics fan now. I've always been a Red Sox fan, but Bruins and Celtics, I've been completely colonized by the place that I moved to.
Yeah, I'm Celtics fans as well. So yeah,
last night's game was amazing. It was the best game of the year. Oh, it was so good.
Yeah, I can confirm with Oklahoma City. Yeah.
So, are you a person who is comparing the size of things to the hockey playfields? Or?
I don't know. I think
I work a lot with Canada and Canadian colleagues, and it was this was such a cultural shock for me to because I know like soccer fields kind of size comparison, and they are comparing everything to hockey. So
yeah, they do that. It is kind of funny, and I can having played and having watched so much, I can understand what they're saying. I think most Americans compare everything to an American football.
Football, yes,
that's
field.
True. Yeah.
That's the one more than baseball or hockey or basketball. It's everything's always like that's 3 football fields long, or that's a football field, and of course that when you're talking to Europeans, football is not the same thing.
Yes.
At
Soccer.
all, and very confusing, especially the American sport where there's very little kicking.
yes.
Yeah, that's for me personally. Those differences are super interesting, and always really fun to talk about it. But
And
Michael, we are incredibly grateful for your time and for this conversation. So we really hope your book will be published in Polish. But regardless, we said, we recommend it to every one of our listeners. So thank you very much, and we hope to see or hear from you soon.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to talk to you and to hear your opinions and everything. So amazing.
It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I like seeing your stuff on Facebook. I see many beautiful things that come by, and I really enjoyed talking to you today. This was great. It had not been the greatest day. I was able to go home. Usually today is a research day, but I had to go into campus to do some academic advising. And I drove all the way home and left my laptop at work and had to turn around and go back and get it and come home. So this was not shaping up to be a good day, and you made it into a really, really good day. So I appreciate that a lot. And just thank you for all the kind words about the book, and also for the service that you're doing for like the worldwide community of Tolkien fans and scholars. And one of the best things about being the editor of the journal is I get to read and often publish work by people all over the world, and I'm always amazed by how, even with the barrier of language in the way, the insights that people all over the world have sent in. And so it's great that I was able to talk to people all the way in Poland, and I hope I get there someday, sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much. And we hope we will see us somewhere live. So it will be great to meet you.
I just found out recently that I will be one of the speakers at Oxenmoot in Oxford this September. So I'll at least be on the right side of the Atlantic for that.
And do you plan to be next year in Birmingham regarding the 50th anniversary of Silmarillion?
I don't know. I hadn't. I actually did. I had that like in the back of my head, but I haven't thought about it. I probably should be. There's
Matthew is thinking about it very intensively.
Birmingham for sure, because I was in Oxenmoot last year, and this year we have 1 week before Oxenmoot we have in Poland one of the actually great big event, and it's first time that we trying to connect all the people from all the Poland, from all the Polish fandoms, small fandoms, to do something bigger. And that will be first one. So we will stay in Poland this year, and next year for sure somewhere in England.
The 50th anniversary of the Silmarillion is something I should go to. It's always a question of just like getting the timing worked out because with teaching, the teaching is the thing that I enjoy the most in my life, and I hate to, miss days. And obviously when transatlantic travel is involved, it takes it's very hard to not like wreck a week of classes. So I can only really ever do one event per semester. So this year it's Oxenmoot, but maybe Birmingham the year after would be the thing to do for the fall. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Great. Let's keep in touch with that.
Okay, thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you.
That is the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for your time at the Green Dragon Inn, and remember, we are waiting for your comments and questions. And don't forget to click subscribe and like buttons on our channels.
Notes and other material used in this episode can be found in the description of the episode on our website. There you can also find our Tolkien collection, a full, very rich library of books and other media we use to create the podcast.
And in the next episode, we are coming back to our journey through the Lothlorien in the chapter called Lothlorien. So, see you in Dragon Inn next week.
As Gandalf said, may the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks.